Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Toronto, Ottawa, and Kingston, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. If you have not listened to part 1 as of yet, we suggest you start there. When we last left the Edmund Fitzgerald, it had vanished from radar under the relentless assault of the Witch of November. The ship's final message, "We are holding our own," spoke to a desperate attempt to survive against towering waves and frigid winds. But moments later, it was gone. Without a distress signal, without survivors, without answers. The storm eventually passed, but in its wake, it left 29 lives lost, a ship shattered and scattered across the lakebed, and a mystery that would haunt maritime history forever. In this episode, we continued the journey to uncover what happened that fateful night. We explored the theories, from structural failure to rogue waves to a possible collision with a shallow shoal, and examined the desperate search for survivors that came too late. We'll descend to the depths with explorers who visited the wreck, uncovering eerie details and heartbreaking discoveries that added to the legend. And of course, we'll reflect on the enduring power of Gordon Lightfoot's ballad, which turned this tragedy into an epic story, one that resonates as deeply today as the tolling of the mariner's church bell. Join us as we return to the icy waters of Lake Superior, where the Edmund Fitzgerald lies in silence, and yet, through its story and song, speaks to us louder than ever. But before we get to that, since this episode is coming out on December 6th, we want to wish everyone who celebrated a very Merry Krampusnacht. If you're listening to this, it means you haven't been dragged off to hell in a wicker basket by the Christmas demon. So, congratulations on surviving another year. There are actually many spooky elements to the holiday season, and we'll be showcasing them at our evening of haunted holiday stories at the Bytown Cinema in Ottawa and the Fox Theatre in Toronto, one night only, on Saturday, December 14th. We'll share Krampus's story, explore other weird Christmas traditions, watch some animated short films, and even have games, trivia, and prizes. And, for a select few, a mini VIP investigation at each theater after the main show. These exclusive tickets sell out fast, so be sure to grab yours soon. For more spooky holiday fun in Toronto, our Alone in the Dark experience runs on Friday nights throughout December. We turn off all the lights, save for a few candles, and explore the darkness, searching for signs of life from the restless spirits of the village. If you have some restless holiday guests, this is a perfect opportunity to get them out of the house and do something fun. For details on our evening of haunted holiday stories, Alone in the Dark experience at the village at Black Creek, or any of our online adventures, including The Haunting at Home, please visit our website at hauntedwalk.com. Plus, we offer gift cards for the spooky souls on your holiday shopping list at hauntedwalk.com/giftcards. Connect with us this holiday season on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk, and we can't wait to share the chills and thrills of the season with you. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn those minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up, or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. One of the most heartbreaking elements of the Edmund Fitzgerald story is how agonizingly close the crew came to safety. Whitefish Bay, nestled at the eastern end of Lake Superior, between Michigan and Ontario, was just an hour or so away, a haven that would have provided relief from the relentless winds and the towering waves of the storm. The entrance to the bay is marked by the Whitefish Point Lighthouse, the oldest active beacon on Lake Superior, first lit in 1849. For generations, it has guided vessels through the treacherous waters of the region, known grimly as the graveyard of the Great Lakes, for its high concentration of shipwrecks, the Edmund Fitzgerald being its most famous victim. Today, part of the lighthouse station serves as the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum, a place that preserves the stories of those who lost their lives on the waters. In our last episode, we explored how the storm's intensity crippled the Fitzgerald's ability to navigate. The ship's radar antennas had been blown off the roof, and even the radio beacon at the Whitefish Point Lighthouse had been knocked out, leaving the crew to operate in near total blindness. Their only lifeline was the radar updates relayed by the trailing Arthur M. Anderson, offering a tenuous sense of where they were and, more importantly, where they were headed. The cruel irony is almost unbearable. Had they managed just one more hour of battling the storm's wrath, they would have made it to the shelter of Whitefish Bay. Captain Cooper of the Arthur M. Anderson faced an uphill battle, convincing the U.S. Coast Guard of the urgency of the Edmund Fitzgerald's plight, a delay that would draw sharp criticism. After contacting the Coast Guard at 7:39 p.m., a full search did not commence until 9 p.m., with the Anderson, still the closest vessel, asked to turn around and go back and search for survivors. Air support did not arrive until 11 p.m., by which time the Fitzgerald had been silent for nearly 2 hours in violent and unforgiving waters. The search yielded fragments of the ship, including its lifeboats, which showed signs of being torn from the ship rather than lowered into the water. No survivors were found, and the fate of all 29 crew members decided. The wreck itself was first detected on November 14th, 1975, when a U.S. Navy plane identified magnetic anomalies in the water. Side-scanning sonar revealed 2 large objects lying on the lake floor, but confirmation had to wait until the better weather the spring provided. In May 1976, a Navy submersible dove to the site, discovering the Edmund Fitzgerald resting 530 feet below the surface, split into two massive sections. Between them lay a grim field of scattered wreckage, including taconite pellets, twisted hull plating, and hatch covers. Eerily, its stern section stood upright in the mud, with its propeller unnaturally pointing upwards. But what caused the ship to take on water enough to lose buoyancy and dive to the bottom so quickly without a single cry for help still could not be determined. Lightfoot wrote his version of the story not long after it occurred, before any official reports were released, and already we see there are a lot of questions and hypotheses of what may have happened. One of the most unsettling things about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and as is the case with many shipwrecks, is that there are no survivors able to tell us exactly what happened. All we can do is make the best guesses based on the available data, with an understanding that the mystery will never be fully solved. The first official report from the US Coast Guard suggested the sinking was due to issues with the hatch covers. These covers would sit on top of the chutes where the cargo would be loaded in. If not securely fastened, water could enter the cargo hold during rough weather, eventually to the point where it could sink the ship. This controversial hypothesis was particularly cruel for the families, as it laid so much of the blame at the feet of the crew for improperly, or less than thoroughly, attaching the clamps that would hold the covers in place. The National Transportation Safety Board released their own findings shortly after, which differed quite starkly with the US Coast Guard report. Based on footage from the submersible, they observed two hatches that were buckled inward, indicating significant pressure placed on top of them, enough for them to cave inwards. They believed the Fitzgerald sank suddenly from the flooding of the cargo hold due to the collapse of one or more hatches under the weight of giant boarding seas, instead of flooding slowly from a leak in the hatches. Could the giant 35-foot waves that crashed into the pilot house of the Anderson, which Captain Cooper saw heading towards the Fitzgerald right around the time of her sinking, could they have been what struck the telling blow? Another prominent hypothesis was that the Fitzgerald made contact with the Six Fathom Shoal, which in places is as shallow as 31 feet. This could have ripped a hole in the hull of the ship that started it slowly filling with water, further exacerbated by the ongoing storm. If this damage was in the midsection of the ship, around where it seemed to break, the area would get disproportionately heavier compared to the bow and stern as it was filling with water. An unlucky series of waves might have lifted the midship out of the water unsupported, leaving the frame of the ship to absorb all that weight, which may have been too much to ask. However, it should be noted that the 6 Fathom Shoal was searched after the Fitzgerald went down, and no evidence was discovered of a recent collision or grounding. The other prominent theory about the Fitzgerald's tragic end suggests that its demise was rooted in structural flaws, worsened by design choices and the relentless forces of nature, and the almost 750 trips the Fitzgerald had made in its shipping lifetime. Adding to the mystery is the fate of her sister ship, the Arthur B. Homer. Both ships were built with welded hulls, a modern innovation at the time, but one that sacrificed flexibility, making them more vulnerable to the pounding waves of the Great Lakes. The Fitzgerald modified winter load line allowed her to carry heavier cargo, but this brought her lower in the water and increased the strain on the already stressed structure. Previous crew members recall the ship groaning and flexing under pressure like a diving board during storms. When the Homer was permanently retired just 5 years after being lengthened, it raised troubling questions about the durability of both vessels. Evidence from the Fitzgerald's wreck suggests she may have broken apart on the surface, spilling taconite across the lake floor before her stern and bow sank separately. Naval architect Raymond Ramsey later concluded the ship was fundamentally unfit for the punishing conditions of that fateful November night. This theory paints a grim picture of a ship designed to push boundaries, but ultimately undone by its own limitations. Though, if the ship did break apart on the surface, it is surprising that no distress call was made from the vessel. Lake Huron rolls, Superior sings, in the rooms of her ice-water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as all the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. There were several expeditions to the wreck in the decades that followed. Each one provided new and interesting little details, but none offered a definitive reason for the sinking. In 1994, Gene Curran, a board member of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, was the first to photograph the wreck using a submersible with a plexiglass front. As they described it, the size is incredible. You're creeping up on this large piece of machinery that at one time was alive. It's almost like coming upon a dinosaur, sitting in the quiet and darkness in this eerie setting. It was, at one time, on the surface, alive. Up to now, no one had seen any of the bodies of the crewmen, or at the very least, no one was saying they had. Most were presumed to be entombed in the stern section. The men in the pilot house were thought to have been expelled out of the broken windows when the water gushed in and flooded the ship. The Fitzgerald's massive wreckage was scattered over a large area, and given the less than ideal conditions on the lakebed, it's very possible that many of the submersibles had passed over a body simply without seeing or noticing it. However, another expedition in 1994 was the first and only one to come across human remains. Partly hidden by debris, the body was greatly decomposed from 20 years in the water, but still clearly a person. It was clad in overalls and was wearing a life jacket. Like the story of the Fitzgerald herself, we can't be 100% sure this was a member of the crew, and if it was, there would be no means to identify who it was from observation alone. This discovery prompted family members to start petitioning the Canadian government to declare the ship off-limits to future expeditions or sightseers, and pushed for stricter laws prohibiting the display of such photographs or video images. In 2006, the Canadian government took significant steps to protect the Edmund Fitzgerald wreck site by amending the Ontario Heritage Act, This amendment established a 500-meter protective zone around the wreck, making it illegal to dive or remove artifacts without a permit. Violations of this protection could result in fines up to $1 million. This action recognized the site as a grave site and aimed to preserve its sanctity. Under U.S. maritime law, the Edmund Fitzgerald remained under American jurisdiction despite sinking in Canadian waters as it sailed under the U.S. flag. The ship's loss, valued at $24 million, was the most significant financial disaster in Great Lakes history, compounded by the sinking of the cargo, 26,000 tons of taconite. Lawsuits quickly followed from widows and family members. The ship's operator sought to limit liability to just over $800,000 under U.S. law and preemptively compensated families under confidentiality agreements before an official cause was determined. Legal experts have suggested that the U.S. Coast Guard's findings, which avoided assigning blame to the company or the captain, helped protect the corporation from more extensive lawsuits. The ship's bell was recovered on July 4, 1995, and replaced on the wreck with a replica bell engraved with the names of the 29 sailors who perished. Relatives of the deceased and officials signed a legal agreement granting the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society custodianship of the bell to create a permanent memorial at Whitefish Point, Michigan. The agreement required the society to maintain the bell and prohibit its sale, relocation, or commercial use, with ownership transferring to the Mariners Church of Detroit if these terms were violated. Controversy arose when the bell's protective coating was improperly stripped during maintenance, and again in 1996 when plans to use the bell as a touring exhibit were blocked by the relatives, who thought it made the bell a traveling trophy. The artifact now remains on permanent display at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point. In a musty old hall in Detroit they prayed, in the maritime sailors' cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchgumi. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early. Gordon Lightfoot had no idea how the song would take hold and the significant interest it would create in the wreck and the story of the men who lost their lives. It also touched him personally, as he developed relationships with the families and the museums, and would often attend events that commemorated the ship and its final fateful journey. This closeness is also responsible for another small change to the lyrics that Lightfoot would often make, replacing "in a musty old hall in Detroit they prayed" with "in a rustic old hall in Detroit they prayed." What follows are some of the most powerful lines in the song. In the maritime sailors' cathedral, the church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. There's an interesting little bit of historical context to share here that isn't readily apparent when you are listening to the song. As the storm's fury faded from memory on the morning of November 11th, 1975, Father Richard Ingalls rushed to the Mariners Church of Detroit after a call from Robert E. Lee, curator of the Denison Great Lakes Museum. Lee's words were ominous. There was trouble with the Fitzgerald. For those steeped in maritime life, trouble was a coded and ominous word, a refusal to say out loud what both men feared. By the time Ignalls arrived at the unheated stone church, a sanctuary for sailors since 1849, the grim reality was becoming clear. The Edmund Fitzgerald had vanished into Lake Superior's depths, taking its 29 crew members with it. Though no official word had come, the truth was sinking in. The Fitzgerald was lost. Steeling himself for the weight of what lay ahead, Father Ignalls ascended the bell tower. Gripping the thick rope of the church's massive 1.5-ton bell, he tolled it 29 times. Each mournful ring echoing through the silent streets of Detroit, a somber prayer for every life lost. In life, as in the song, the bell tolled for the crew before any official confirmation of their fate. Returning to the nave, still wrapped in his overcoat against the chill of the unheated building, Ignalls knelt in the sanctuary. In the quiet, he prayed a personal requiem for the crew, thanking God for their courage, their labor, and the hope of eternal life. As he prayed, footsteps began to fill the space behind him. A small group of reporters had arrived, drawn by the sound of the bell. They asked him about the Fitzgerald, but there was little to say. The search continued, yet the truth was evident. There was a sense, he would later recall, that everyone was lost. In those early hours, the Mariners' Church became more than a place of worship. It became a focal point for grief. The bells tolling, Father Ignalls' prayers, and the gathering of strangers marked the beginning of a collective mourning for the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, whose story was just beginning to etch itself into history. Lightfoot's ballad closes with the same verses that open the song, slightly altered yet achingly familiar. This cyclical structure, rooted in the tradition of oral storytelling, returns us where we began, but now changed, haunted by the tale we've heard. As listeners, we find ourselves standing beside the crew well-seasoned, confronting the relentless power of nature and the inevitability of history repeating itself. The repetition reinforces the unyielding rhythm of the Great Lakes, their storms as enduring as the memories of those who have sailed and those who have been lost in their depths. In a poignant echo of this storytelling loop, the Mariners' Church rang its great bell once again the day after Gordon Lightfoot's passing in May 2023. It tolled 29 times for the men of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and one final time for the man who gave their story its song, in his own way becoming part of the legend, ensuring the voices of the crew and the unrelenting spirit of the lake will resonate far beyond the waves of Gitchigumi. Thank you so much for joining us for this special 2-part episode. For information on our evening of haunted holiday stories in Ottawa at the Bytown Cinema and in Toronto at the Fox Theatre on Saturday, December 14th, as well as information about our Alone in the Dark experience at Toronto's Village at Black Creek, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. And if you're looking for an awesome Christmas gift for someone spooky in your life, we do have Haunted Walk gift cards available. And you can also grab those on our website, hauntedwalk.com/gift cards, to get all the info. We would love to spread a little holiday cheer with all of you, so please be sure to connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk. If you've enjoyed this special 2-part series on the Edmund Fitzgerald, I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you're listening, with a special mention of the Fitzgerald. As always, a special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor, Eden Monroe from the Shaky Gallows House Band for the additional music, and to Gordon Lightfoot for giving us one of the best songs ever written. Until we meet again, wishing you safe harbors in stormy seas. Sweet dreams.
Mm-hmm.